Hello, LinkedIn, and now Facebook, and also YouTube. Glad to be sharing live on a couple of different channels now, and hope that those of you that join on those channels will engage. Look forward to hearing from you. Welcome to the Wisdom Seeker Live weekly podcast, and we will be talking today about discernment, and looking forward to diving into that a bit. Uh, as we always do, we start off the podcast with talking about what we mean by wisdom, since it is the Wisdom Seeker Live. Wisdom is a three-step process, and it is ongoing. But the three steps of that process, are: one is gaining knowledge. And that's facts, figures, things that we learn from various ways, sources, and we gather that together and use it, hopefully, to begin to make decisions and so on. And then the next step in that process is the gaining understanding, or experience, if you will, by taking what we've learned and start using it. We learn if it works or doesn't work, and what we can do with it. And so we begin to understand it and get better with it, which is great. By the way, it is common that some people think that knowledge is power, and I appreciate the comment. There's some element of truth to that, but I don't think it is a completely accurate statement, and from this vantage point. So encourage you to move beyond knowledge and then into understanding. And then the last part is where we gain wisdom. And the difference in wisdom and understanding and knowledge is that wisdom is taking our knowledge and our understanding it and begin to look at it from a much larger perspective. In fact, it needs to be in perspective outside of ourselves, so that we begin to understand how the use of our knowledge and understanding applies to the world around us and the people around us. And for those of us that are of a spiritual bent, we like to think of it in terms of seeing things from God's perspective, and getting that as our place to operate from and decide from. Good morning, Sharon. Good morning, Karen. Glad to have you here this morning. So wisdom is the point of moving beyond just having some knowledge, which is nothing wrong with it, and also moving beyond just our experiences to be able to then put it all together in a way that is going to help us to live and function in a way that is better for us and better for those around us. And so that's the way we look at wisdom on the Wisdom Seeker Live show. And what I want to for us to consider is that I think that wisdom is also connected to common sense. Now, we say common sense isn't so common anymore, and I agree it's become a challenge, and I think that's because at least in part because we don't seek wisdom like we used to. We don't see the value of wisdom and the priority of it. So wisdom's a three-step process. The process starts with some knowledge, and then it goes to our experience or understanding of how that knowledge works and applying it. And then when we move into wisdom, it is using our knowledge and understanding and putting it in the context of the bigger world outside of ourselves, and for those of a spiritual bent. It is seeing seeing things and behaving on our knowledge and understanding from a perspective of our God. And so that's where we kind of go with things. And I wanted to let you know today we'll be talking about discernment, but towards the end of the podcast, I'm going to share some what I think is cool news about having a couple of guests over the next couple of weeks. And then I'm also going to announce my initial approach to the course that I'll be teaching on potential, so that if there are any of you that are interested in plugging into that course, that you'll be able to. So as I always like to do when I start the program off on a topic, I like to look at some different perspectives. I think there is wisdom in doing that. And so one of the things I did is look up the word discernment. And it's really interesting. I don't know if you've noticed, if you look up words, sometimes the definitions will be very concise and clear, and you will get, real clear understanding. Sometimes they're not as understanding, and because they're harder to grasp and harder to deal with. And this is one of those. And the first definition is the quality of being able to grasp and comprehend what is obscure, skill in discerning. And then the other is an act of perceiving or discerning something. So when we start talking about a word and we say it's an act of, or the position of, or whatever, and so anyway, just it's means that there's a lot here that maybe we can dig into, and by sharing with each other, that we can help gain a better understanding. Welcome, Alexandre. You're making a comment. Let's see. Alexandre says knowledge plus experience equals DAAT. Not familiar with the term DAAT. I don't know if maybe that's a typo and you meant data. I appreciate the comment. If you'll clarify what DAAT is, that would be helpful. But thanks for the comment. Really appreciate it. So the other thing is I like to look at, because I am a visual person and I find that more and more people are visual, I like to also look up the images related to the topic at hand. And to me, again, it's insightful to be able to see people's perspective, not just in text, but in picture, because I think that it helps us get some additional insight. And you can see that differing types of thoughts on discernment. This particular one, by the way, I like to let people know that when I'm looking around and it looks like I'm distracted, I promise I'm not. I'm monitoring 3 screens so that I can do the best I can to make the show flow well. So discernment is not knowing the difference between right and wrong. It's knowing the difference between right and almost right. So kind of interesting, a nuance there. And let's see here. And this one, of course, for those of us spiritually oriented, discernment, seeking God's guidance in our lives. Okay. And by the way, as we go along, I would like for you to add comments and questions that you can offer, because part of the value here is that we can seek and gain wisdom together. And I know each time I'm live, I pick up things from you. So please feel free to share in the comments, and because that's an important part of what we do. So as you can see, discernment takes on a lot of different concepts or perspectives. The one thing I do think interesting, and this is something we'll be dealing with, is if you'll notice a lot of the visuals and perspectives is has a spiritual component to it. It's not just a logical thing. Okay, so Alexandre, and I apologize if I'm not pronouncing your name correct. I'll do my best to be respectful of names, but so that DAAT means tree of life. Okay, thank you for that clarification. I've learned something new. I really appreciate it. And good morning, Shashir. Welcome and glad to have you. So anyway, discernment, as we get into it, we see that there's a lot of different components to it. And oh, here's another perspective of DAAT, insight. Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. So discernment's an interesting topic, and as we see from the way the definition is there, it is open to a lot of perspective. And I think way I see discernment is also something that we commonly call our gut. We get that feeling that about something and really sense something. Others call it instinct. And it's one of the interesting discussions around this topic is whether it's a good idea to use our gut or instinct in making decisions. And some suggest that we not use it because it's emotionally based and unreliable, and so we should only approach it logically. And I can understand where they come from, being a logical person in my approach. But I think that, again, that may be a little incomplete in consideration. And so, excuse me, others go so far as to say that they will rely solely on their gut to make decisions. And I appreciate the comment there, because some people have come to value the insight, the help that they get from using their gut, and feel like it can be more reliable. And I think that I appreciate that. But again, I think that we have to be careful because the potential for getting into an unbalanced situation. Good morning, Scott. Glad to have you with us this morning. Scott's one of our regulars. And so want to try to tackle it and see if we can clarify a bit, gain some wisdom about the concept of discernment. Karen has a comment here. We have different learning approaches. I am a visual learner as well. Appreciate it. Well, good, Karen. I'm glad to hear that it works. I guess it's part of what I am as a trainer. I just can't present things in one fashion because I know that people do learn differently. So I'll always try to appeal to the different learning styles, and it's part of what I do and who I am now. So this concept of discernment, which again I think is the same thing as what people call gut and instinct, is a very valuable part of making decisions. I will go so far as to say it's wise to use it. Now, one of the concepts that I always talk about is balance. So you're not going to hear me say that we should rely solely on our instinct or gut, because I don't think that's proper balance. Well, hello, Erica Warfield. Thanks for joining us. And Erica has a comment, an insight. I listen to still small voice within, that is the Holy Spirit. Discernment is my favorite topic. Well, glad that you like the topic, Erica, and I appreciate your thoughts. And yes, I agree that learning to discern and to be most effective involves that still small voice and being able to tune into it. And yes, I agree, in the best case, it is a place where we're hearing the Holy Spirit to direct us. Oh, and I'm sorry, I missed a moment ago. Alexandre shared a passage in Scripture, 2 Chronicles 22:39. Can't say that I remember that one offhand. My one of my favorite Chronicles passages, 2 Chronicles 7:14. But if you would like to break that down for us, Alexandre, that would be great. And by the way, I have to say that I do not want to offend anyone else's faith, but I do say that if you truly want to find wisdom, that the Bible is a great source. Even if you don't choose the tenets of faith from the Bible, it is got so much wisdom to it that it's worth exploring to gain that wisdom. So I think that our discernment, our gut, is a combination of the process of gaining wisdom. And what I think happens is that people that have been taught or affected culturally with the concept that knowledge is power and that's all we need, don't go any further with it and will be lacking in discernment or gut. And even I think that's the source of where we have come to say that that common sense isn't so common anymore, because culturally and unfortunately, I guess fortunately, I've been around a while. Nothing wrong with being mature, and as we put it in plain speak, old, is that we are back in the end of the boomer generation and starting with the Gen X generation, we began to teach that we would be a knowledge-based society. And I appreciate the comment that, again, beginning of wisdom is knowledge, and that's fine. But the problem is that has become our primary focus, and how it's affected us culturally is our education system and what its focus is. And it's primarily towards a knowledge base. And nothing wrong with knowledge, not knocking knowledge, but it lacks the full balance or complement that we need to ultimately have common sense or gut. And what, again, the word I like is discernment. And so, so knowledge is a part of it, because in order to react and respond, the more that we know about it, the more helpful it is. And then the second component is our understanding of our knowledge and how it works. And part of that, for example, is that, and it's going to sound a little silly, and I don't mean to make light, but I think it makes the point, is that, for a long time, we were told man can't fly. And then we discovered that man can fly with assistance. And so we learned about the laws of aerodynamics and so on. And we learned how to actually fly with assistance. And we haven't figured out yet, to my knowledge, which I don't know everything, so maybe I've missed it, but it's always with some kind of assistance. And but once we started flying, we learned that from experience, there are certain other considerations that have to go into it. So our understanding begins to grow, and we have been able to adjust based on the experiences from the knowledge that we can fly to what happens when we're flying, and the experiences tell us that there are certain things we should or shouldn't do, and that's the basis that a lot of why we do safety checks and things like that. And then having known a number of pilots, and there is a third component, and that is the part where they have been flying long enough so that when they're flying, they are able to recognize things about flying that may not be in the book, that may not be able to explain everything every time, but when it starts occurring, those that are what I would suggest wise in their flying experience have then learned that they need to respond or react, even though that is not officially something in the book. Welcome, Sandas. Glad to have you. Sandas is a good friend, and he makes a comment. Again, I apologize, Sandas. Some people on the streaming system show up as LinkedIn user, and but this is definitely you. His comment, life happens. Observing that only as a regular process help us to gain wisdom. Yes, that's why back when I first kicked off the Wisdom Seeker Live podcast, our first initiative, if you will, was what we call the Wisdom Seeker 40-day challenge. And that process was also 3 steps. And that was to disconnect, get away from whatever it is that distracts us or that potentially gives us misinformation or wrong perceptions. Then we observe. And when we start observing, we observe inwardly, we observe outwardly. Then we began to see more things that are a factor in our lives and the lives of those of us around us. And then at that point, those observations lead us to gain wisdom because we're beginning to see it beyond just what we do day to day. So thanks for sharing that and that reminder, Sandas, that observing goes a long way. So knowledge is a part of discernment, as is understanding. And then the third component to where it connects with wisdom and becomes most effective is when we begin to connect spiritually. And what I think that we miss sometimes, and as Erica shared a bit, that still small voice is there for a reason. And even those that are not spiritual, depending on what choices that they have made in their life and direction they've gone, still have a part of our design. And I know sometimes I sound like a broken record, but when you start gaining principles and begin to see how they fit together, it's just hard not to. But part of our design is we're designed with a spiritual component, and depending on where people are in their journey in life, some have not completely disconnected from that or short-circuited their spiritual component, and so they can still get some insight from that. There are those that have completely ignored or chosen to be able to turn off, if you will, or short circuit the concept uh, their spirit. And so the more you do that, the less that you have of the third component, if you will, the still small voice part of being discerning. And so that's the part of the value of why I talk about, remember, we are made up body, soul, and spirit, and that in order to be effective in our growth, to be effective as a person, to be the person that we're supposed to be, you need to nurture body, soul, and spirit. And by doing so, you have all three components working together, and you have begun to gain wisdom, which opens up that third component that we call gut or instinct or discernment, so that we get to a point that it's even, we gain confidence in that part of it because we see the reliability of it. People that are have short-circuited parts of their makeup and do not have that spiritual component in their life, they're going to probably not be as relying or dependent on their gut or instinct. And not to be offensive, but they're going to lack having as much common sense, because what we for years call common sense was not just relying on our knowledge, it was relying on the total picture in what we're about. And when we have that total picture, or in the best developed sense, wisdom, then we are able to avoid what to some of us that have wisdom looks like really silly choices. And we go, wow, they just didn't use good common sense. And it's because they are lacking in development of the concept of discernment. And so, yeah, it's a very important part. And I depend on discernment on a daily basis. Thanks for the nice comment, Alexandre. I appreciate the encouragement. It helps me keep moving forward. And Sandas has another comment. Inside duality plane of perception, the highest we can acquire is knowledge, but what we acquire from the level of reality beyond duality is wisdom. Yeah, it's a process that we don't need to stop with one. And even when we gain wisdom, that doesn't mean we have arrived. In fact, to continue gaining wisdom, you continue the cycle of growing and learning and developing. And that means growing, learning, and developing body, soul, and spirit. And as we begin to do, or as we do this more and more, just like, the early stages, I use the flight analogy, early stages of flight, we had the basics down, but if you look back at the history of flight, a lot of crashes because they had to gain experience and understanding that was beyond the laws of physics per se, because it's not just the laws of physics that factor into flight. And as they gained more experience and also additional insight beyond just looking at what went on inside the airplane as part of the machine, that they considered what went on, started considering what was going on with the human, the pilot, as well as the forces outside, weather, and so on. And what's happened is, over time, because we have continued to, I would suggest, seek wisdom in regards to flying, it has become much safer as a byproduct. And if you talk to pilots, you know that they are trained well to use their knowledge and their experience, their understanding, but there are moments that they have to resort back to and call on their gut and what they have understood, and apply all of it in situations to be able to respond best. So again, the whole process of seeking, gaining wisdom, and then having the instinct or gut or discernment is a refinement of all of those growth components. Let's see. Okay. Alexandre asked a good question, and he wants to know, how can we develop our perception? There's a checking list for a pilot. Yeah. Pilots have what they call pre-flight checklists, and they use those consistently, and they make sure everything that they've already learned is checked off. Because, by the way, the pilot strongly believes and knows that because he has the lives of people in his hands, he wants to make it such a priority that they go through those checklists without fail. Well, and I don't want to sound offensive, but I think our best checklist for wisdom and life is the Bible. It gives us so much insight. And for those of us that call on the Bible for our a basis for our faith, is that we believe that it's written by the designer or creator, or if to put it in maybe simpler terms, our manufacturers, kind of our operating manual, just as the pilots use the notebook full of pre-check lists and things to check before they take off. Well, that's a place that we can get those pre-flight checks or pre-journey checklists. And what I suggest is that we consult that very regularly, and that becomes a part of our daily journey. And of course, the other way to have that information is what we're doing, and that's sharing among ourselves, learning from other people. In other words, pilots will hang out with experienced pilots. In fact, part of the process, by the way, if you don't know, before a pilot ever is the pilot, they have to go through stages of learning, and part of that those stages involves actually being in a plane with an experienced pilot to learn from them before they take on the full responsibility. So it's a great process. Great question. Thank you, and Alexandre. And again, Sandas says common sense is instinctive memory to certain aspects of happening which we already know and face. Yeah, common sense is based in part in our experience, and certainly a factor. The one thing I would suggest is that in order to have this discernment refined, or gut or instinct, whatever term you prefer, we're better off to have all components, not just our experience and knowledge. We have the third component, and I think this is where we can really become effective in using our discernment and our understanding. Thanks, Alex. I will do that. I appreciate allowing me to use your friend name. But yeah, we really need to develop in all of these areas to have an effective level of discernment. And earlier Erica referred to that still small voice. Well, part of that is, in order to hear the still small voice, we need to have times of being quiet, or going back to disconnecting. Shut out the noise, outside noise, so that we can hear that still small voice. Because an interesting thing about our Creator is that our Creator has the character that he wants us to have, and is what we call in the South part of the United States, he's a gentleman. In other words, he's not going to force or impose that on us. He will do everything to help us with that still small voice. But if we choose not to hear it or we ignore it, then that's a decision we make, and we live with the consequences. Because what's interesting to me is that I think everyone's had an experience along the way where they make a decision and it doesn't go well, and they go, I should have listened to my instincts. I should have followed my gut. And that's an instance where we have not understood this concept of wisdom and the concept of journeying and growing totally. And what happens is, if we pay attention, which some do, some don't, over time we become to really appreciate the value of that, and we began using that as part of who we are. And so even in that way, we become wiser in our approach. And a comment from Sandas that is so true is that the best foundation for our journey, not just our big picture journey, starts within us. And we just need to continue to look inwardly. And the common term that we see on LinkedIn and other social media is becoming self-aware. It's another way of saying looking inside. And yes, there is a great deal of value in that introspection, that reflection, because it helps us as part of our journey, and our journey into wisdom, in fact. And so, yeah, we've got to really develop it if we're going to be effective with it. And I know there have been moments as I have gone along, and I have every intent to do something because I think it's the right thing to do, given everything. And I start to do it, and then I will stop and not quite follow through. And I'll do this multiple times, and then finally I will give up. And I think at that point, the value in that is that I have tuned or fine-tuned my instincts, my discernment, my gut, to a point that I know that if it is not, I'm not getting the right input as a total picture. Again, I would not rely solely on that. It may be the final piece of information where I will make a decision, but it's not without considering the various aspects. And when I have done that, and what's really a challenge is sometimes it will even seem illogical. And so we wrestle with it a bit. We think, well, there's no good reason that I shouldn't do whatever. And but then as we rely on that still small voice, that discernment within us, we realize we in the end are protected from something, or it wasn't going to be the best fit, the timing wasn't right, and so on. I apologize, I've got a little frog in my throat this morning. So Sandas makes another comment, says it all starts with vibration, and vibration can only be heard when we are quiet and receptive. Yeah, To me, vibration is a term that I think of is related to our spirit, is related to that complete part of our design. When things are functioning in balance and in sync, then we are vibrating, or we're functioning in a way that things are working together, and we are flowing is another term I've heard used. And then thanks for that, Sandas. And then Alex comments that I think that a good part of process is being effective, useful to ourselves, to the other ones, and majorly to our Creator, being His associates in terms of elevating and edifying souls. Alex, you have really caught on to the concept of wisdom, and I would even go so far as to say what you just shared helps define where our success is, where it comes from. And for that reason, let me put that back up, is that the latter part of what you share is that it's our effectiveness is for other ones, and majorly to our Creator, being His associates in terms of elevating and edifying souls. Success, and I'm going to share this little saying. I don't know, maybe it'll be helpful. Success is being obedient to our design, passion, and purpose, and living it. That is where success is found. It's not found in stuff, things, money, position, all of those things. They're nice, and some people will get them, some will not, and either way is fine. But that's not our success. Our success is recognizing that what we're about is living what our Creator wants us to live. And that includes one of the things, the way I define success a little more succinctly, is success is being available and obedient to the will of our Creator. And the key thing to pick up from that is that success is not outcomes, because we can't control outcomes. We spend a lot of time trying to control outcomes and get frustrated, discouraged, disillusioned, lose hope, because we're not ultimately responsible for outcomes. What we are responsible for is being that effective person in relationship to what our Creator has designed us for. That's where we find success. And the challenge with that is what success looks like is not the exact same for everyone. And that's where we struggle, because we want to think, well, if this person is successful by doing these things, then all I need to do is these things and I will be successful. The problem is with that approach is that we miss the uniqueness of our design, and also our level of wisdom, experience, and so on. And so that's all part of that bigger picture. And by the way, I will suggest that one of the things that we need discernment for is to understand where those differences lie, and where, what part of principles that we observe in other people can we apply to us. Or if it's a true principle, not that we don't need to apply it, we need to understand how it applies to our lives. And that's where we get into using common sense or wisdom, and discernment helps us to know when we are not connecting with that principle in a way that is that fits what's going on with us. So the value of discernment to me is it takes our our knowledge and our understanding and refines our effectiveness in applying it. And that, to me, that's kind of how it helps me understand it better that way. Alex has shared another comment. Let's see. When we have some difficult or hard times, when things are not flowing, which happens most of the time, you're right, our struggle, it is the point where we need to get better. And again, Alex, thank you. Part of the value of discernment, or our gut, is to know when that situation is there, and that we are not flowing, and we use our instincts. We hear that still small voice and says something's not right. And sometimes when that happens, we can't always explain it. And that's the value of having discernment or gut. At that point, we aren't able to logically come up with it, and it's not necessarily an emotional response. It's beyond that. And when we develop that discernment to a point where we know we need to respond, then we are getting to a point where it becomes effective for us in our life, and as Alex shared, effective in our relationship to others. So that discernment can really make a difference in refining how we respond to everything going on, especially as Alex talked about, and that's during the hard times, our struggles. That's when discernment is such a big help, because during those times, as I tell people, I may not have answers, but I can listen and offer perspective. And what I don't always verbalize is, at that point, I try to use my discernment so that I might help others. So good comments. Thank you. And Erica, thank you for that kind encouragement. That means a lot, and I really do appreciate it. Those of you not connected to Erica, you need to connect to Erica. She's a great encourager, and she's would be a good one to gain some wisdom from, among others. Good morning, Brian. Glad to have you here this morning. Always look forward. Brian is one of the people that I've actually been on his podcast, and so I appreciate him showing up. And Brian is my encourager friend, and I appreciate it. So this concept of discernment or gut is something that we need to have as part of who we are, and use it effectively in moving forward and gaining wisdom. It's a part of that process. It is a kind of the fine tuning, if you will, in decision making, because sometimes we have to make decisions when there is no law of physics that specifically addresses it, or there is no legal basis for it in our whatever legal system you have in your country. And let's see, Brian shares a comment. I believe experience help us tune in our gut and discernment. I don't know truly how the loss of a loved one until I lost my dad suddenly. Now I know exactly how to reach it, minister, and empathize to others as well. Yep. Part of, again, the whole growth process and wisdom, knowledge, understand experience, and then perspective from the way God sees it, if you will, or that bigger picture outside of ourselves, is where we get there. And then I believe that the discernment is the refinement of going through that process and hearing more of that still small voice, as Erica shared, is when we can truly become discerning. And the other challenge for us is that those of us that seek wisdom, sometimes we still are hesitant to rely on our discernment, our instinct, our gut, because it's not something that we can necessarily always logically or emotionally explain. And so we have to get more accustomed to hearing and responding well to that still small voice. And yes, excuse me. Alex's comment is that refining our emotions is also part of the whole process. It is. The value of growing and nurturing body, soul, and spirit is that they influence each other. And this is something that may be a bit controversial, but I think that the key component here is that we learn to allow the deciding factor in what we do, how we respond, is the insight or the direction of our spirit. And for those of us that are Christ followers, that's the Holy Spirit. And the more we can hear that, then that becomes the way that we have complete checks and balances in who we're designed to be. And that becomes the deciding factor for us if there's ever any conflict or doubt in the process. That that becomes the tiebreaker, if you will, because sometimes when we are working through things, our body may tell us one thing, and our emotions may give us something else, and then we have knowledge that says something a little different, and we are not clear how to make that decision. That's where our spirit and the Holy Spirit can help us to give the tiebreaker, if you will. So we really need to have a refined process there and a refined experience there, to a point where we can begin to rely on that and not just rely on other inputs such as our body and our soul alone, because those have their own challenges. That's a whole nother topic that we can get into for a whole nother show or two. But so the value of discernment, or instinct or gut, is that it helps us to make decisions when there is not a clear path or a clear principle that we can apply. And in much of life, that's where we live. The Bible gives us so many amazing principles and wise insights, and then we have laws that govern us that help give us directions, and then there are other laws of science and so on. But at the end of the day, the only thing that we can really begin to help us apply all of this other in our lives is that level of discernment, that level of responding to our gut. And again, I gotta remind, I don't agree that everything should be a gut decision. I think that is unwise to do so, but it may become regularly a deciding factor if there is ever a question about it. So I hope that today we've gained some insight into the concept of discernment or gut, instinct, whatever term you prefer. And I know I have learned things from you all. I appreciate you sharing what you have, because it's helpful to me. Now, I did want to, let's see, Alex has comment. Self-control is also a key component to get tuned to what the Holy Spirit wants from us. His will is good, useful, pleasant, and perfect, complete. I agree. And see, to me, part of self-control is knowing how to rely on those principles, certainly, but also that instinct or still small voice. And the self-control comes in when we have to decide between the still small voice or our instinct or discernment and what others are telling us, or what in some regards seem more logical. And the self-control is to go, I see all of this on one side, but inside I know that I need not to do that or to do that. It depends on the situation. That's where we begin to truly exercise self-control. So thank you, Alex. I appreciate that. We're running up on the clock, and I did want to share, I've got two guests that are going to be joining over the next 2 weeks. Next week, my former pastor and my mom's current pastor of her church is going to be joining us, a gentleman named Mike Lynch. Great guy, and I'm looking forward to hearing and discussing his perspective on wisdom, because I happen to believe that Mike has some wisdom, maybe more than I do even. And then after that, I'm really pleased to announce that I've got Dr. I from LinkedIn is going to join us, and we're going to talk about the wisdom in making good choices in education. I believe that in our current culture, our education choices become a large factor, especially for young people. So we're going to be talking about how to make some wise choices related to education. And if you, let's see here, I tell you what, after we finish, I will put a link to both of those guests in the comments for today's show so that you can refer to them. And then after taking the poll related to how we want to deliver the course on potential, it was a pretty strong comment or input that most people would prefer to have a course that is maybe an hour session at a time, broken up over multiple days. So as I complete design of the course, then that's the way that I will plan to roll it out. And it's going to probably be, realistically, it's probably May before I roll it out, and then I will announce it, and hopefully you and others will be able to join as we talk through and learn about finding our potential. As you know, that is at the heart of the vision God's given me, is to help everyone I can to find their potential. So I'm going to share this course, and but I'll get the details out in time for those of you that would like to be a part of that. And I probably, because of the responses, will look at delivering it in a couple of other ways as well. But that'll be the first one, is an hour at a time over multiple days. So I'm excited to be able to share that. Hope that you'll join as we roll that out. And if any of you, by the way, would like to be a guest on camera guest as part of Wisdom Seeker, let me know. I'm always open to having guests, because I obviously do not have a lock on wisdom, and love to have others that are willing to talk about their wisdom journey, because at the end of the day, that's what we're all about, is journeying to wisdom together and growing together. So thanks to everyone, and I hope and pray that you will seek and gain wisdom and be able to share that with others. Take care. Join us next week. Bring friends along, and we will be back Monday at 8 o'clock Eastern. Look forward to that time again. Thanks, everyone. God bless.